A great weekend of football in the books and another one coming up this weekend, a full slate. I'm not leaving the couch. 24 hours. I'm just going to be sitting there watching college football all day Saturday. But we have a lot to get to today on the show. Welcome, everyone. Happy Monday, and welcome to the Media Row podcast, of course, sponsored by Stevens Automotive and Sales and Kelly's Little Nipper. Kelly's Little Nipper, 1701 East Grand Avenue in Des Moines. Historic Kelly's Little Nipper. Great food, great drinks, and even better community. Trivia on Wednesdays. You got live and local music over the weekends. Great place to go watch games this weekend as well. Great food, great drinks, better community, and a proud sponsor of the show. So make sure you get over there and use the keyword that you hear on the show in Woodley. Use keyword Woodley, and your first drink at Kelly's Little Nipper is on the house. Can't get a better deal than that. 1701 East Grand Avenue in Des Moines, Kelly's Little Nipper. When you go there, make sure to let them know that Media Row sent you. So a busy show. We have a busy week. We have Coach Woodley on Wednesday. We have our predictions for Friday. But today, we have the Iowa State game to recap. We're going to have Pat Murphy from 24/7 Sports, who covers Ohio State, to come on to talk about what could be the biggest game of the regular season in week one, and some Big Ten news, and then finish up with some just fun stories I had from my experience at Lambeau Field. But let's just get into what we witnessed on Saturday. Great game. Iowa State takes down Kansas State 24-21 in Dublin in what was the best way to start a year. If you're in Iowa, if you're a Hawkeye fan, you were still sitting down and watching this game, and I'm sure you were probably still fully invested. It was incredible. Being in Lambeau and seeing everyone focused in on the Cyclones and the Wildcats was just such a cool sight to see, and it just played out perfectly. It wasn't a sloppy game. It wasn't a blowout by either team. It was what people expected from these bitter rivals and two really talented teams. And you had some struggles early on. I mean, it wasn't great weather conditions for either quarterback, but just both played with guts. And Iowa State comes out victorious 24-21 and now gets ready for a quick turnaround, which is still mind-boggling. But they come back home in Ames, bringing the trophy from Dublin, starting 1-0. Will probably be higher on the AP top 25 poll now with that big victory over number 17 Kansas State. But now they got to take on a top 5 team in the FCS in South Dakota. We'll preview all of that more on Friday, but I want to get to just the three things that stood out to me with this Iowa State victory over Kansas State, 24-21. Number one, and we've kind of already hit on it, but just congratulations, college football. Way to just answer the call. I mean, again, it wasn't sloppy. It wasn't a blowout. It went down to the wire. It was great football. Back and forth. Physical. It was everything you wanted. And then number two, and this one isn't something I learned, isn't really something that surprised me, but it was just reassuring. Rocco Beck's a dog. And Taylor Mauser is a dog. Iowa State, Cyclone fans, even if this was a loss, you still had a lot to look forward to this season. But with just those performances from your offensive coordinator and your starting quarterback, just it lights a fire in you that you go, okay, this team's ready. I mean, there's still some kinks that need to get fixed, as every team early on in the year, but really impressive. Rocco Beck, only 14 completions, but 3 total touchdowns, 183 yards. And I was a person who sat here last Friday, picked Kansas State. I was proven wrong. I thought Iowa State was going to have more question marks. Early in that first half, when the offensive line was struggling and Rocco got sacked 4 times, that was concerning. That was what we were worried about on the show. But then Rocco, just with composure, maturity, And just that sense of if he ever has the ball, you're kind of calm as a fan. Even in the most stressful scenarios, you're calm with the ball in his hand. And that's all you can ask for a starting quarterback. And just some really incredible throws. And Rocco leads his team to victory. And in terms of Mauser and Coach Campbell, who picked up his 100th career victory at Iowa State, 10th year as the Iowa State Cyclones head coach, but going for the win, fourth and short with, I think there was about 3 minutes left. Those are the play calls you want to see. Early on in the season, you don't want to play not to lose. You want to play to win. And that's what Mauser and Campbell both did on Saturday. 3 for 3 on fourth downs. They really struggled on third down. But man, when it mattered, Rocco got the job done. And then just great adjustments too. First half, again, it wasn't a great start for the Cyclones, and you had those sacks. Second half, offensive line really stepped up, and that was another one of my concerns I had going into the game. One of the question marks, when you have a left guard out, how will the running backs do? And in the second half, mostly the fourth quarter, you have Hansen really take over the game, and Iowa State just starts charging up the field, and it wears out a Kansas State team. And then the offense for Kansas State, sure, did they score in less than 2 minutes to put the game within 3? Yeah, but now that poor defense has to go back out there and try to slow down the Cyclones team that, behind a strong offensive line and a big offensive line, has just marched up the field. And so it just wore them down, and it was just a physical battle we all expected. And so just number 2 on my 3 things that impressed me was just Rocco and Mauser. Just very impressed from their week 0 performance. And then number 3, Cyclone fans, be ecstatic. Wear this like it's a bowl victory. It's against a top 25 team, your rival. You've now put yourself on the map. And more for the fans, be ecstatic, because this is what your defense can do with healthy linebackers. Last season, linebackers, injuries all over the place. It was weird. It was just bad luck is the best way to put it. But healthy linebackers, and they played fantastic. Bacon was great. Neal was great. Ebel was fantastic. And there's more to come. There's more growth behind these guys for the season. So Iowa State wins 24-21. Great way to start the college football year for a Cyclone fan. Wear it with pride. Great way. You're 1-0. Took down a rival, leading the Big 12. And now all those people that had Kansas State, taking over the Big 12, maybe realizing that this conference is kind of up for grabs. And it definitely is in my eyes. There's a lot of really strong teams in the Big 12. And Iowa State has another tough opportunity this weekend at home against South Dakota in week 1. So Cyclones win 24-21. That is my quick recap of the game, but I want to get to our interview guest, and Pat Murphy from 24/7 Sports covers the Ohio State Buckeyes, because we have the biggest game of week 1 and could be the biggest game of the regular season. Number 1, Texas, going on the road to the Horseshoe to take on number 3, Ohio State. So, Pat, I think the best place to start with this huge game is to just start with what the reigning national champs in Ohio State have lost since hoisting up the national champion trophy. 14 players drafted in the 2025 NFL draft, and then new offensive coordinator and new defensive coordinator. And you're going up against the number 1 team in the country to start the year.
Yeah, it's no doubt not the easiest of tests coming out of the national championship game a year ago. Obviously, these two teams played in the playoff semifinal, but very different teams, as you pointed out. So if you're looking at the Ohio State side, 17 guys who were at least key contributors, if not starters, gone. 14 of those guys were drafted this past year in the NFL. and the Buckeyes have worked hard to replace them. And this is what happens when you have so many guys come back like they did a year ago. Obviously, Ohio State, if we're flashing back to a year ago this time, it was all about like natty or bust. Like they had so many guys that were seniors, juniors, fifth year seniors. So you got to replace those guys, right? And I think they've done a pretty good job of doing that so far this offseason. But I mean, you're talking quarterback, Will Howard, both running backs and Travion Henderson, Quinshon Judkins, Emeka Egbuka, who was a first round pick, two offensive linemen, one of which was a first round pick. You've got the entire defensive line gone, a linebacker, a cornerback, a safety, a nickelback. So quite a bit there, and some other guys that contributed as well. But Ohio State has recruited well, right? They've done a good job of managing this roster. I think had last season gone differently in terms of the guys that had come back, you probably would have known some of the guys that are going to step into bigger roles this season. So obviously the big talk this offseason has been the quarterback, Julian Sayin winning that job. But yes, so many guys are stepping up into new roles. And I think from a national perspective, that makes Ohio State a little bit of an unknown. For those of us close to the program, fans that follow it, I think there is a belief, and I would say that Ohio State believes there's a belief that there's plenty of talent on this roster. Experience, not a luxury for this team, but I think they really like their talent.
So you bring up, just there are people who are going to need to step up in new roles on the field in terms of play. But man, you lose Sawyer, who is just a veteran and like a voice for the players too. How important is that loss for this team, especially when you're going up against the number one team in the country to kickstart your season? But is there someone with you being so close to the program that you have confidence or that you've heard or seen take that more veteran leadership role and kind of the voice of the team like Sawyer was?
Yeah, I think the closest comparison I'd make is Sonny Styles, who is another guy who was born outside of Columbus, in one of the suburbs. So connected to the program. His dad played for the program. His brother's on the team and should have a pretty big role playing sort of their nickelback spot this year. He's going into his fourth season at Ohio State, converted from safety to linebacker last year, and I thought really established himself as a linebacker throughout the season. Now he stepped into that leadership role. And I use him because, like Jack Sawyer, he is a kid that grew up watching the Buckeyes. He was an Ohio State fan. I mentioned his dad. Like, there's just not to take anything away from guys that maybe come from somewhere else. But if we're talking about like that type of leadership, I think, and he was just recently named a captain, one of the four captains. He was named their Blocko recipient, which is just the guy who wears number 0, but they make that a big honor because it looks like the Ohio State Blacko. So I think that he's probably the closest to Sawyer in terms of that. I'm been connected to the program since I was a kid. You know, I grew up wearing Ohio State stuff. Now I get to be a part of it. And then in my senior year, junior year, whichever it was, I'm going to be one of the leaders and really outspoken guys. So he would be the one if we're talking direct comparison to Sawyer. Also, defensive guy, you know, those type of things. I think he's probably the most like for like. And I think they've really liked what they've seen from him from that standpoint of really establishing himself as a leader this offseason.
Which one are you more intrigued by seeing versus Texas? Are you more intrigued seeing how the new coordinators handle the pressure or the new players? Which one are you kind of more intrigued by?
That's a really good question. So I'll break it down a little differently. Like defensive coordinator Matt Patricia, obviously he's coached big games, right? He's won multiple Super Bowls. He hasn't done in college since I think 2002 when he was a GA at Syracuse. So it's been a while since he's done it, but I think there's confidence that he can handle most situations given what he's gone through previously. The other side, though, you've got Brian Hartline, who has been a really good wide receivers coach, just a coach in general at Ohio State, but he's never called plays before for the Buckeyes. He's going to do that on the offensive side of the ball. So I think I'm very curious to see how things go with Brian Hartline because I think just the newness of that is an interesting question. There is the dynamic of Matt Patricia and like, what does this defense look like? But I don't have any doubts that he's going to be able to adapt. Maybe not immediately week one. There may be some growing pains in there. But to answer your question, I think it's more on the player side. There's just so many unknowns. Like there's a lot of I think or I'm pretty confident in this guy or this guy, but just because you have so many guys that are new to the roles that they're stepping into, as opposed to Brian Hartline, who's been around the offense. He's helped contribute in various ways, even if he wasn't calling plays. Again, Matt Patricia and his experience. I think I'd probably lean to the player side of things.
So let's jump into some of those I think players. Who do you think maybe has the quickest impact or is looked upon to make a quick impact versus Texas on Saturday?
Well, I think it's got to start with Julian Sayin, the quarterback, because look, you've gone through this offseason. You obviously had Will Howard last year, and his experience was crucial for that team. We know that Julian Sayin's talented. He was one of the top rated quarterbacks coming out of high school a couple years ago, committed to Alabama, ended up transferring to Ohio State after Nick Saban retires. This will be his real first opportunity to do much of anything. And it's coming in arguably the biggest game of, definitely this month, maybe the whole season. I don't know. We'll see. At least the regular season, 1 versus 3. So, I mean, what other role would you like to be in if you're a competitor like this? This is where you get to, hey, week 1, I get to prove myself, right? So that's a bit of an unknown, and his play will obviously dictate sort of what the offense looks like and things like that. But defensively, I think there are some guys like the defensive line I mentioned, all new starters on that side. You need that defensive line to be ready against Texas, right? They're going to have those boys on the offensive line ready to go. You've got Arch Manning on the other side, who's taken up a lot of the headlines, a lot of the noise coming into the season. So you saw Ohio State's defensive line. I mean, the Jack Sawyer play at the end of the Cotton Bowl was iconic, at least in Columbus, and probably not so much in Austin. But now you got to do that again. Different group of guys going up a different quarterback. So like those are the two that immediately come to my mind are the guys on the defensive line, and then obviously the quarterback play has to ramp up very quickly.
It's funny you say how, the Arch Manning headlines that they're the ones overshadowing things right now on Texas, that because Texas has a lot of things going right for them clearly as the number one team. But one of the biggest things I think the Arch Manning headlines are overshadowing is just how strong this defense is. I mean, it could easily be the best defense in the country. And you have Jeremiah Smith going up against the best defense in the country. You can't ask for anything better right there.
Yeah, I'm going to be honest. If you asked me a year ago, and multiple people did, about what I thought Jeremiah Smith's freshman season was going to be, I very much downplayed it. I'd seen a lot of really talented Ohio State wide receivers come in. They'd been highly recruited, they'd been highly regarded, all that. And like it usually took at least towards the end of their freshman year, maybe their sophomore year before the breakout. So I was like, okay, I'm sure Jeremiah will have a role. I think he's going to start. He's going to play a lot more of these guys, but like, I need to see it. Well, I think we all saw it, right?
Multiple
So,
times.
yes, yes. So the interesting thing for me is like, how do you follow that? What do you do now? Because I mean, not even arguably, it's the best freshman receiving season in Ohio State history. He broke a ton of records last year. So what's next? And the nice thing has been that you've got a group around him that has handled things really well. I think Brian Hartline moving into that offensive coordinator role, not that he wouldn't have been able to work with Jeremiah and stuff, but he's just taking on a bigger role at this point. So that's helpful. But I think Jeremiah, just in general, the more we've kind of gotten to know him over the last year or so, year and a half, I guess, since he's been at Ohio State, like despite how good he is, and he knows he's good, it's hard not to when you've done some of the things he has. So humble, wants to work. Like, he could be out doing all sorts of NIL endorsement things and all that. And he does some of that. It comes with the territory of being one of the best players in college football, but he wants to work. There were video clips of him throughout the offseason that I know at least went around on Ohio State social media spheres of him working out with teammates down in South Florida because they've got multiple guys that are receivers down there. Him working out with some NFL guys. His cousin is Geno Smith, so he's connected in the NFL circles. So humble, wants to work, wants to get better. I've asked a couple people throughout the offseason, like, what does better look like when you have a season like that? Like, what do you do? And everyone points to like the little things of like, all right, you break your route, you're running a curl. Like where do you break the route to come back to the quarterback? Things like that. The tiny things that just take you from the really good players to the elite players. And that's been his focus this offseason. I think also just dealing with the fame. Like he was a famous guy down in South Florida as the top ranked player in the country coming out of high school, right? But now he's a household name throughout the country. He caught the play that sealed the national championship game, right? So like there was a deal he did recently. They opened a Dick's Sporting Goods in Columbus, a new one, and there were so many people there because he was the guy that they like used to promote it. I mean, it was insane the crowd that showed up for this, and he's just had to deal with that stuff too while also staying focused on football. So I think it's been a balancing act to some degree, but I think he's handled it really well by all accounts. And at least like I said, like he's dealt with some of this before, given what he has gone throughout his life. But I think this will be telling. Like week one, what does it look like then? But then like week 4, 5, 6, as he continues to progress throughout the year. But I think he's gonna be fine.
One thing that I'm kind of concerned about with Ohio State regarding their defensive side is that secondary, because we saw a lot of big plays go against them. Oregon had a few, and then Notre Dame in that second half of the national title game had a few. And so now they're going up against Manning and this elite Texas offense right now. Just what does the secondary need to do to compete against Manning and the Longhorns?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing when we talk about Ohio State's cornerback group, at least, is Davison Igbinosun, who's been a 2-year starter. This will be his third season. Penalties. He was the most penalized defensive player in college football last year. And that's been a topic we've had with everybody we talked to on defensive side of the ball this offseason, cleaning that stuff up. They did things like putting mitts on his hands so he can't grab in practice. Matt Patricia talked about in the NFL, he's had guys that he's had to work with on these type of things and different stuff that they've done. So I think that's a big thing. Like you can't commit the big holding pass interference penalty at the wrong time in this game, right? That could be a drive killer, a game killer potentially. Jermaine Matthews, who's stepping in for Denzel Burke, Denzel Burke. He was a guy who rotated in a good amount last year, actually played the entire second half on defense against Texas because they really liked the matchup they had. So he's a guy they're pretty confident in. Then the safeties, obviously led by Caleb Downs and what he does. Now they do have a vacancy there. Lathan Ransom was one of the guys that they lost to the NFL. They're still kind of figuring out who's going to take that spot. Malik Hartford, Jalen McClain are both battling for that. I honestly think they'll play both guys. I think they like both guys and they bring some different things. Caleb Downs can also move into sort of the nickel spot and both guys can play. They've worked on some of that in practice. And then when Caleb's not in the nickel spot, I mentioned Sonny Styles' brother earlier, Lorenzo Styles. He's going to be a guy that is going to be crucial because Jordan Hancock, who played that nickel spot last year, was so versatile. He's now with the Buffalo Bills. If you've watched any of their preseason, he's playing safety. Sometimes he's out at corner. Like he can just do a lot of different things, and that unlocked a ton for this defense. I don't know if they have that guy in terms of the nickel spot, unless you just play Caleb Downs there, which I think they'll do a little bit. So that's something they're going to have to figure out. But yeah, I mean, this is going to be a big test, no doubt about it, with Arch Manning, these receivers. I think the biggest thing, honestly, is can Ohio State get pressure on Arch Manning, make him uncomfortable, and then these guys don't have as much to worry about in the secondary.
This game is so unique because after week one, whoever wins this game, they're asserting themselves right away. They're kind of saying to the whole nation, like, you're going to have to watch out for us, which I think a lot of people are already have these two teams circled. But when looking at these two teams' remaining schedules, Texas, Ohio State, one of these teams has to lose. Who has the toughest road to get to the college football playoff if they start 0-1?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I mean, the nice thing about the college football playoff stuff now is you can lose this type of game, right?
Yep.
Because you're going to have 12 teams. I think the loser of this game is still going to feel pretty confident that they can come out of things, go into the rest of the season, especially once you get into conference play and work your way back into the college football playoff. In fact, assuming this is the type of game we expect, and it ends up being a fairly close contest, I wouldn't be surprised if the AP poll comes out the day after the game and both teams are still ranked top 5, top 6, right? But if we're breaking down the schedule, I mean, you look at what Texas has to do in the SEC. After Ohio State, you got San Jose State, UTEP, and Sam Houston. Those should be fine. Same with Ohio State. They're going to go Grambling, Washington, or Grambling and OU before they go out to Washington. But then Texas goes to Florida, Oklahoma in the Red River rivalry. You've got Georgia in mid-November, and then Texas A&M at the end of the season. So I think they're comparable because Ohio State, I mentioned that Washington game, a game that I think's fairly tricky. You got Penn State coming up. You get that one at home in early November, and then obviously the Michigan game at the end. So I think these two kind of similarly reflect each other. But I think Texas probably has a bit more difficult schedule, especially if Oklahoma can kind of get back on track this year. Like that game to me, I always loved that game. It's one of my favorite rivalries in college football. As I was growing up, like it was a do not miss that game. Now it tends to be at the same time Ohio State is playing each year. So I have to like put it on an iPad while I'm covering the game. But if Oklahoma is a legitimate, I know they're ranked 18 going into the season. If they're a legitimate top 20 team and can kind of get back on track, that's another ranked opponent that Texas has to deal with this season. So I'd say, at least on paper right now, Texas's road back is a little bit more difficult, but I'd also say that it gives Texas some opportunities to get back. You're going to be in the limelight. You're going to have some of these marquee games. Not that Ohio State doesn't. I think both of these teams will be very much in the picture come the end of the season, assuming they handle business regardless of what happens next weekend.
So I have down a few questions, just overarching Big Ten questions. And I want to start with the Penn State hype because a lot of people have them as, man, this is the year Franklin might be able to put it all together and at least make it to the semifinals again, if not a national title game. Are you buying in to the Penn State hype?
I think so. And that's not a great answer. I understand that. But you mentioned James Franklin, and that's to me the biggest question. When I'm talking to our Penn State guys at 24/7 Sports, like that's the question I always have. Is this the team that can get over the hump? And I think even they are still kind of in a wait and see mode just because, this team got to the semifinal last year, right? Was driving to potentially win that game and play Ohio State in the national championship. So this program's close. And like you look back at the last several seasons, like it's losses to Ohio State and things like that kept them out of the 14 playoff. I think the talent is as good as it's been since Joe Paterno was coaching Penn State. I think they are following the Michigan and Ohio State paths of the last couple of years of bringing talented players back, focusing on player retention, adding a few key pieces, from the transfer portal. But they do have to come to Columbus, right? That's going to be one of the biggest games on their season. They get Oregon at home. That's the whiteout game. I think even if you lose both of those, Penn State's probably still in the picture, especially if those games are close. And then it's what happens in the postseason. And that's where I think the James Franklin factor comes in. The other thing that I have as a question for them, Drew Aller. Is he or is he not a top quarterback? Coming out of high school, everyone loved Drew Aller. He just climbed the rankings. Ohio State he's an Ohio kid that Ohio State didn't initially recruit, got back in the mix late, tried to flip him from Penn State, wasn't able to do it. He's been good, but in the biggest moments, he's had his issues, right? You look back at that semifinal game we were talking about, didn't complete a pass to receiver. Now, does that say more about Drew Aller or the receivers that they have? Which I think is a whole nother topic. But if they can put the weapons around him, I think he's good enough. You look at Will Howard a year ago, right? Will Howard wasn't a first round, CJ Stroud type of quarterback, but he was good enough, could do things with the right weapons that you can win a national championship. I think Drew Aller is at least that good, but he's got to go out and prove it. So if Franklin and Aller can kind of come together and, put the pieces in place, I think this team should be at the very least back in the semifinal this year of the college football playoff, if not further. But there's always that but with these two right now. And I think you just got to prove it. It's like Ryan Day a year ago, right? Coming out of that Oregon game, at least from our perspective, like dialed in on Ohio State, Ryan Day can't win the big game. That was the topic, right? And then he loses to Michigan, same thing. Well, then he goes around and wins the national championship. Those conversations aren't happening. It's the same thing with James Franklin, same thing with the quarterback in Drew Aller. So the only way to prove you can do it is by doing it. And that's the obstacle that's in front of these guys.
One of the coolest things to watch last season was just the rise of Indiana. I mean, I haven't seen an Indiana football team be relevant, I mean, ever, it felt like. And now last year they kind of come out of nowhere, start really playing these tough teams well. I mean, they played Ohio State well in Columbus a year ago. Are they a one-hit wonder, or are you expecting them to really continue the success? And have you heard if they've built together a strong roster for 25 as well?
I want Indiana to be good. I think Kurt Signetti is great for this sport, and coaches that are
I'm the
willing,
same way.
yeah, go out there and just like when he stood at the stage at Big Ten Media Days before last season and was like, Google me and things like that. I thought it was great at the time, but I thought it was also just funny. Then he goes out and has the season that he has with that group, which, as you said, has not been, they're a basketball school. Let's be honest, right? Not that you can't be both. Like Ohio State's done that in the past, Wisconsin, plenty of schools have done that, Texas. But for Indiana to even be, and I know there was a lot of conversation, should they have been in the playoffs? Indiana in that conversation is something no one was talking about going this into the season outside of Bloomington. So I think it's a really interesting topic of like, can you do it again? Right? You do it once. Now all of a sudden people are talking about you. You're not a team on the schedule that people are going to overlook. And I think they have the roster to do it, to answer your question. They brought in some more transfers. I think they've recruited a bit better. I really like what Kurt Signetti can do, not just the way he talks, but the way he actually backs it up. So I think this is a team. Are they back in the college football playoff at the end of the season? I don't know about that. Like, I think having a one-loss season is difficult to do at a program like that. I think the schedule's a bit tougher this year, but I think this is a team that if you can sort of build on, maybe not build, that's not the right term if you're not going to make the playoff, but like continue some of that success. Now all of a sudden you're starting to roll, and I think that's a real possibility. There's a really interesting game not too far in the season when they play Illinois, and like I've heard people refer to it as like who's the Indiana of this year? Because Illinois is getting some hype, right?
Yeah.
So I think that game will be interesting. They have some tough challenges on their schedule, but I do think that they're moving in the right direction to have a program that is more in the line of what we saw last year and less about what we've seen historically throughout Indiana football's history.
So, with us being based in Des Moines, Iowa, I got to ask you just an outsider's perspective on the Iowa Hawkeyes
Yeah.
and their new quarterback, in Gronowski.
Yeah, I'm interested to see. We've gone so long with like the jokes about Iowa quarterbacks in the passing game, really the offense in general, right? And Kirk Ferentz and Brian being his offensive coordinator, his son, and all that stuff. And look, there is an old school way you can still play football, but how much or how high is that ceiling when you're going to play the like grind it out, tough defense first. It's just a different kind of football that teams play these days. So I think that Iowa has recognized that. I think they are moving in the right direction in terms of, hey, let's get into 2025 and we don't have to sling it all over the yard, right? But we at least need some offense and things like that. And look, I was there. It doesn't feel that long ago. I guess it was when Iowa beat Ohio State back in what was that 2017,
17? Yeah, when it was
yeah,
like the 55 to whatever.
yeah, and
JT Barrett threw like four interceptions.
yeah, the pick
So,
six.
yeah, that
Uh,
was crazy.
yes, I was there for that game. I watched Iowa pass the ball around those tight ends, both of which are now in the NFL, like doing their thing. So there is a recipe for success, Ryan. We know the defense is going to be good. We know you've got offensive linemen. They've got decent skill positions, maybe even better than decent. The quarterback play, though, is the thing. I need to see it. That's until I see it, I can hear all I want in the preseason and the buzz and all this and that. We've heard it before, right? I mean, who was it? Cade McNamara that transferred from Michigan a couple
Yep.
years ago. It's like, all right, they've got a quarterback. Like, is he the best quarterback in the Big Ten? No, but he's going to elevate Iowa to a different level. Didn't happen. Eric All came with it, like all that stuff. So I just need to see it. But I do think that there's been a recognition within that program of like, hey, we've got to get our offense into 2025. We can't be this one-dimensional offense that has to rely too much on our defense because you just can't play football that way anymore, or at least not that way consistently to win on the biggest stages. And again, I think that they are moving in the right direction.
All right, last one for you. Who are the two teams playing for the Big Ten title at the end of the year in your eyes?
Yeah, I've gone back and forth. I think Penn State will be there. I think that like at the very least for Penn State, this is get to the Big Ten championship game. Hopefully you win it, right? You just never know. But like, and they were just there last year, and then get back to the like at least reach what you did last year. Get back to the Big Ten championship game. Hopefully win it. Get back to the national playoff or national semifinal. There's a very real possibility we get Ohio State, Penn State, November. I think it's November 1st, early November, in Columbus. Get them in the Big Ten championship game, and then maybe even again a third time in the college football playoff.
That'd be nuts.
Yes, and look, we saw it last year. Obviously, Ohio State losing to Michigan didn't get to the Big Ten championship game, but you were in line for potentially something similar. Now, if Ohio State goes to the Big Ten championship game, do they play Oregon in the Rose Bowl? Maybe that doesn't work out that way. But I mean, it was not far from at least potentially being another rematch there. So those would be the two teams I would probably pick. I think that's what most people would say. I think Oregon is an interesting sort of outside pick for the Big Ten championship game. They lost a lot, and the buzz isn't what it was a year ago. Now that doesn't mean they can't figure it out. I think that Dan Lanning has typically been, and not that there's a big sample size, but like he's done very well with a veteran quarterback. Now, he's got a guy who's been around college football for a few years and more, obviously with his time at UCLA, but he hasn't played a lot, right? So let's see how that goes. An interesting one sort of as a curveball is what does Nebraska look like this year? Like if Dylan Raiola hits, and look, Dylan Raiola was committed to Ohio State for a long time. I've seen the kid in action multiple times. There's a lot of talent there. If
I just talked about this Nebraska team last week on the show because that schedule is very easy for them. Or not, I shouldn't say easy, but a lot of winnable opportunities.
Agreed. So like that's my sort of outside pick. As if you're not taking the two front runners in Ohio State or Penn State, and I don't want to discount Michigan. I just think you're probably starting a freshman quarterback. I just think there's going to be bumps in the road. I think Bryce Underwood's going to be really good. But yeah, Nebraska, that's an interesting. You get some things to go your way. Dylan Raiola becomes Patrick Mahomes light, as sort of he likes to do. I really like Dylan. I think he's a really good player. I think he's a crazy hard worker. I know that he left bad taste in the mouth of Ohio State fans when he decommitted and Georgia fans too. But I think he's really comfortable there by all accounts. And like, if that starts to work, maybe you got something going in Lincoln. That's just kind of my oddball pick.
Huge thank you to Pat Murphy for coming on. Make sure to go follow him on social media. Would love to get him on to talk Big Ten, as the season progresses as well. And I need to give a shout out to someone that's been just a great friend and a mentor through my time with KXNO and then when I was covering Iowa State. But Nick Osen, who now covers Wisconsin for 24/7 Sports, but used to cover Iowa State, he's been great. I'll text him like, hey, I want to get someone from Kansas State on from 24/7 Sports. Right away, has someone ready, and they're always great. Like, he hasn't missed. Did the same thing. Hey, I want to get, Ohio State. It's the biggest game of the week. Sure, am I an Ohio State fan? Yes. But if it was Wisconsin or Penn State versus Texas, we're doing the same thing. And Nick Osen right away sends me a name, and Patrick was great. So really appreciate Nick Osen being a huge supporter of the show and really appreciate it. And we have plans to try to get Nick on the show for when Iowa takes on Wisconsin later on in the year. So have a few things I want to get to before we wrap up today's show. But first, need to go check out Stevens Automotive and Sales, 5320 Northwest Beaver Drive in Johnston, Iowa. 35 years of family owned and operated here in the state. They're loyal people. They communicate effectively with everyone that walks through their door. And also, everyone that walks through their door can expect one thing, and it's no BS. They are hardworking people, great people to be around. If you need an oil change, go to Stevens Automotive. If you're trying to get a new car, go to Stevens Automotive. If you're trying to just get a starter car for a family member that you're just wanting to make sure is in the right hands, is around people that know what they're doing, go to Stevens Automotive because they're going to get your family member out on the road safely and ready to go. That is what my family did. We have never regretted it. My brother lives out of the state now and talks about it all the time, how lucky we were to find someone as great as Stevens Automotive, as young as we are. You guys need to go check it out at 5320 Northwest Beaver Drive. When you do, make sure to let them know that Media Row sent you. So, a few things I want to get to before we wrap up today's show. Starting with, I just want to tell you guys just the awesome stuff that happened within a 10-hour span when I went to Green Bay this weekend. So a few weeks ago, get a call from my brother and he's like, don't plan anything for the weekend of the 23rd. And as a joke, I'm like, oh, sweet, you got tickets to Ireland. And he goes, no, wish, but got 2 tickets for the Seahawks and Packers. Of course, you guys know I'm a diehard Seahawks fan, so we go up there for preseason. Well, we get our car parked. We're walking around. First off, beautiful, beautiful stadium, Lambeau. But we're walking around and you have the houses right behind the stadium. And I'm wearing my Steve Largent jersey. And we're walking the sidewalk and this guy walks up and he's got a Largent jersey. And he goes, hey, do you want this? And I'm like, oh, what does it say on it? Because all I saw was scribbling because we were walking. And I was expecting, a smart ass thing of like, hope you guys lose. And he's like, it's signed by Steve Largent, the jersey you're wearing. And right away I'm like, oh my God, wait, what? And he goes, yeah, won it at an auction. I'm a Packers guy. I don't want this. So he's like, I've been looking for a Seahawks fan to come down and pick this up. So he just gave it to me. So now I have a signed Steve Largent jersey, which is my dad's favorite player, the whole reason he became a Seahawks fan, and then which makes it the reason I became a Seahawks fan because I just followed him growing up. So I right away I was like, okay, we could lose our tickets. Seattle could, lose 1,000-0, and my day's made. That was great. Well, then day just gets better. We go in, we stop at Hinterland, a bar and grill. We're watching the Kansas State-Iowa State game. We got these great cheese curds, having a great drink, having a good time. And all of a sudden, this family next to us goes, hey, our daughter didn't touch her chicken fingers and fries. Would you guys want them? And my brother and I are like, yes. So within a 15-minute span, we got a signed Steve Largent jersey and free food. Best weekend ever. And football's back on. Best weekend ever. So that's my fun little Green Bay recap. The preseason game, it was preseason, and it's all the 5th stringers and 6th stringers, and it was kind of a dud of a game, especially as a Seahawks fan, losing 20-7. But it was still a great experience. Would go to Lambeau again. If you haven't been, try to go to Lambeau. Fantastic experience. Definitely will go again. But that will do it for today's show. Make sure to tune in on Wednesday. We have Coach Woodley, our first Wednesdays with Woodley to preview the Drake Upper Iowa game. And then on Friday's show, interviews from the post game of Drake and Upper Iowa, a full game recap, and then our predictions for week 1 this weekend. Guys, football is back. I cannot wait for it. I know this past weekend, it was a nice little appetizer. It is fully back this weekend. Can't wait to just sit around and eat junk food and just lose my mind watching 8 screens and trying to keep up with all the games. Hope you guys do the same, and hope you join us on Wednesday when Drake football head coach Coach Woodley joins us here on the Media Row podcast.